This free step-by-step video comes to you directly from Haynes, creators of the world's best repair manuals. Fix your car or truck the right way with our accurate and reliable information at your side. You can complete more than 200 jobs on this vehicle when you purchase the complete online manual at Haynes.com.
Pull the hood release lever located on the driver's side kick panel. Lift the hood safety latch and raise the hood upwards, then support it with the prop rod. Loosen the cable clamp nut. Then disconnect the negative battery cable from the terminal. Secure the cable aside to prevent accidental reconnection. Perform the following steps to remove the air filter housing assembly. Disconnect the electrical connector from the intake air temperature sensor. Loosen the clamp at the throttle body. Detach the PCV hose from the air filter housing. Then detach the fresh air duct from the housing. Remove the two air filter housing mounting bolts. Remove the air filter housing assembly from the engine. Perform the following steps to remove the intake manifold assembly. Remove the 4 bolts attaching the throttle body to the upper intake manifold. Also take note of any brackets that are retained by the mounting bolts. With the coolant hoses still attached, position the throttle body to the side. Disconnect the electrical connectors only if they are being stressed when the throttle body is positioned aside. Disconnect the map sensor electrical connector and release the wiring harness from the brackets on top of the intake manifold. Disconnect the brake booster vacuum hose from the rear of the manifold. Remove the intake manifold support bracket bolt from the rear of the manifold, near the throttle body port. Remove the dipstick and disconnect the breather hose from the lower intake manifold. Remove the bolt attaching the wire harness to the bottom left of the intake runner. Then slide the harness off the bracket to disengage the clip on the lower intake manifold in front of the dipstick tube. Remove the nuts and bolts attaching the intake manifold to the cylinder head. Carefully remove the intake manifold assembly from the engine. Disconnect the ignition coil, electrical connectors, and detach the harness and any brackets from the valve cover. Reposition the harness aside. Wipe off the valve cover thoroughly to prevent debris from falling onto the exposed cylinder head or camshaft and valve train assembly. Loosen the bolts a little at a time in a reverse order of the tightening sequence, counting down from the number 7 as shown. Remove the bolts, then lift off the valve cover and gasket. If the gasket is stuck to the cylinder head, tap it gently with a rubber mallet to break the seal. Do not pry between the cover and the cylinder head, or you'll damage the gasket mating surfaces. Place the number 1 piston, which is closest to the drive belt end of the engine, at the top dead center, or TDC, on the compression stroke. This is accomplished by rotating the crankshaft in the normal direction of rotation, which is clockwise, until the white TDC mark on the crankshaft pulley aligns with the timing pointer on the timing chain cover. The UP mark on the camshaft sprocket should also be visible at the 12 o'clock position. With the engine in this position, the number 1 cylinder valve adjustment can be checked and adjusted. Start with the intake valve clearance. Insert a feeler gauge of the correct specified thickness between the valve stem and the rocker arm. Then withdraw it. You should feel a slight drag. If there's no drag or heavy drag, loosen the adjuster lock nut and back off the adjuster screw. Slowly tighten the adjuster screw until you can feel a slight drag on the feeler gauge as you withdraw it. Hold the adjuster screw with a screwdriver to keep it from turning. Then tighten the lock nut. Recheck the clearance to make sure it hasn't changed. Repeat this sequence on the other intake valve, then on the 2 exhaust valves for the number 1 cylinder. Make sure to use the correct thickness feeler gauges on each set of intake and exhaust valves. Rotate the crankshaft pulley 180 degrees clockwise. The camshaft pulley will turn 90 degrees until the number 3 cylinder is at the TDC. When the number 3 cylinder is at the TDC, the 3 mark will appear at 12 o'clock, and the machine line on the cam sprocket will be parallel or horizontal with the cylinder head surface. Check and adjust the number 3 cylinder valves using the steps mentioned previously. Rotate the crankshaft pulley 180 degrees clockwise until the number 4 cylinder is at TDC. When the number 4 cylinder is at TDC, the 4 mark will appear at 12 o'clock, and the machined line on the cam sprocket will be parallel with the cylinder head surface. Check and adjust the number 4 cylinder valves. Rotate the crankshaft pulley 180 degrees clockwise to bring the number 2 cylinder to TDC. When the number 2 cylinder is at TDC, the 2 mark will appear at 12 o'clock, and the machine line on the cam sprocket will be parallel with the cylinder head surface. Check and adjust the number 2 cylinder valves. Remove the old gasket and clean the mating surfaces of the cylinder head and the valve cover. The surfaces can be cleaned with a rag soaked in brake system cleaner. Apply beads of the RTV sealant to the engine mating surface, where the timing chain cover meets the cylinder head. Install a new molded rubber gasket into the groove around the valve cover perimeter. Place the cover into position and install the bolts to the correct locations. Tighten the valve cover bolts to the specified torque setting using the correct torque sequence. Connect the ignition coil electrical connectors and secure the wiring harness to the noted retaining points. Perform the following steps to install the intake manifold assembly. Remove all traces of old gasket material from the cylinder head and manifold matting surfaces. Install a new manifold gasket onto the engine. Carefully guide the intake manifold assembly into the engine, sliding the lower manifold onto the mounting studs. Install the lower intake manifold mounting bolts and nuts. Tighten the bolts and nuts a little at a time, working from the center outwards until the specified torque setting is reached. Repeat this tightening sequence if necessary, but don't over-tighten the bolts. Connect the breather hose to the lower intake manifold and secure it with a clamp. Attach the wiring harness to the lower intake manifold and secure any retaining clips. Insert the engine oil dipstick and install the wiring harness retaining bolt. Tighten the bolt securely. Install the intake manifold support bracket bolt at the rear of the manifold and tighten it to the specified torque setting. Making sure the gasket is in satisfactory condition, install the throttle body onto the intake manifold. Insert the throttle body mounting bolts, threading them into the brackets at the opposite end. Tighten the throttle body mounting bolts to the specified torque setting. Connect the necessary electrical connectors to the top of the intake manifold and throttle body. Secure the wiring harness into the manifold retaining clips. Connect the brake booster vacuum hose to the rear of the manifold and secure it with the clamp. Perform the following steps to install the air filter housing assembly. Install the air filter housing assembly into the engine. Connect the intake port onto the throttle body, then the breather hose, followed by the intake air temperature sensor at the rear. Connect the fresh air inlet duct, then install the housing mounting bolts. Tighten the bolts securely. Tighten the hose clamp and throttle body securely. Install the engine cover. Connect the negative battery cable to the terminal and tighten the cable clamp nut securely.